Okay, Kirsty, thank you very much. We've cured our technical problems and you have joined me. Thank you very much.
No worries, no worries.
It's you just said to me off air then, it seems like ages ago, and even seeing you, sat here talking to you, it does feel like ages ago that we were sharing the skies together.
It does, it does. I mean, yeah, we're properly into winter now, aren't we? Looking out the window, it's a nice day, but it's cold and yeah, God,
Oh,
it's not,
I'm thick fog outside of my window. It's like you can't see
yeah,
probably in 20 feet, you know?
yeah, we've had that. Yeah, yeah. So, no, it's a long, those nice, long, sort of halcyon, hot, sunny days feel like a long time ago.
They were, but what a season we had, and you particularly third overall, was it in the end?
Yeah, third overall. So that's my
Yeah, I mean,
best ever performance.
is it?
It is actually, yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, I don't think I've ever done top 10 before in the league. No, because to be fair, a lot of my year is often taken up with comps,
Of
uh,
course, yeah.
it has been. And then obviously now I've got young family as well, so quite a lot of commitments. But I didn't do many comps this year. I just did the one that we did together out in Macedonia. So yeah, the rest of my flying was given over to trying to do the league really.
Yeah, I sort of realised this year how big of an impact comp flying has, because if you have to work as well, I mean,
Yeah.
like, obviously I did Romania and Macedonia, which equates to like nearly 4 weeks away, and by the time you've like if you take in weekends and stuff as well, by the time you add that up, that's not just the time you're away for the comp. That's when next time there's a good day. Actually, I can't do it because I got to make up time from being away.
No, absolutely. No, exactly. We're all amateurs, aren't we, really? Got our day jobs and everything else going on, or most of us have anyway. So it is all a juggling act, and even more so for me now with obviously with a young family with Noah and
Yeah.
everything. Yeah, it's even more of a commitment in a way. So
Yeah, but so you've been third this year is the best year for you.
mm.
How long have you been flying?
So I first sort of picked up a paraglider at the end of the 90s. So I first had a go,
Yeah.
but I didn't really get into it properly until sort of mid 2000s. So around about 2005, 2006, I was sort of starting to pick it up much more regularly, and did my first comp. I think I did the Shabba Open, one of the very first ever Shabba Opens. It wasn't the first one. I think it was like the second or third one,
Mhm.
out in Oranje, 2006. It was the first comp I did, and did well in that. And yeah, never looked back after that really. Started doing the Brits 2007, and sort of the last sort of 10 years really I've been doing quite a lot of comps.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so you're like you've always been a name that I've known since the moment I started paragliding, because
Yeah.
I'm an XC guy, right? That's everybody knows Wes flies
Yeah.
XC, and you are an XC and comp pilot. It's that
Mm.
simple. I would say you are as close to myself as anyone I know. I very rarely hear about you going out and just having a beat up and down a ridge, I guess, just because you have your time's precious. So you spend it on the things you like, which is comps and XC flying.
It is really, and a bit like what you've said a few times. I'm not massively into sort of just boating around really. I kind of like a challenge, so hence why the comps have always been strong for me. And if I'm going to do XC flying, then I like to be, a bit competitive around it. I'm up there because I enjoy it being up there. I'm up there because it's just a great thing to be doing. But yeah, I like to have a bit of a challenge as well. If you don't have a bit of a focus, a bit like you say, if you don't have a focus, it's a bit sort of like, can't be
Yeah.
bothered sort of thing.
Yeah, and it because it's so consuming. Like, even if you're just
Yeah.
if I'm going for a day at Westbury, like it's an hour drive there. Let's say I only flew for 2 hours, hour drive home. Well, who's got 4 hours spare in their daylight in their daylight hours? It just
No,
it's a
it's true,
compromise.
and in a way that sort of has impacted me over the years with a number of things. I've not done as much SIV as I would like to have done because, again, to go off and do an SIV course, yes, you can do a weekend, but if you want to get something out of it, you need to go sort of 4 or 5, maybe even a week,
Yeah.
and that's a whole other week out of my leave or whatever. So it's not straightforward really to be able to do all of these things. And something else now, I've just got another harness. because I've had sort of weight issues around the wing I've been flying. I've been feeling I've been flying a bit light on the Xeno 2. So I kind of got another harness now to try out, got Cortal, same as what you've got.
Yep.
Which I've got second hand. And again, it's kind of, I need time to go out and just sort of like
familiarize
with it and everything else. And there's something else I want to do really is I want to practice some different ground handling techniques as well. I'm pretty old school in terms of how I launched the glider, and that became evident when I was out in Macedonia, where I almost got ticked off by one of the French guys telling me that my ground handling was shit. Which basically it is. It's always been the weak aspect of my flying. I just want to get up there and get on with it. So I've never ever put the time in really to get better at the ground handling, and I should do. But again, it's sort of getting the time to do it all really.
I mean, that's it. Everything's time, right? So like back in the late 90s, early 2000s, what made you look to the sky? What were you into before? And was there like an impetus, like family were into flying, or did you just drive past somewhere and see it one day?
No, years ago, my uncle used to fly hang gliders, and when we were kids, we used to go and watch him. So that was kind of my introduction to it, really. That's what put it in my head. And so when I was sort of able to, in my sort of early 20s is when I kind of got into it and first had a go. I did have a go at hang gliding actually initially because that's what he did. But soon gave up on that because paragliding was really coming through then. It was much more convenient. As soon as I sort of my eyes caught paragliding, I wanted to do that really. And in fact, something that was actually walking up Snowdon. I used to do quite a lot of mountain walking, and going up Snowdon and seeing the guys fly right over the top of Snowdon was a real wow moment. It made me thought, that's cool. I got to go and do that. Got to do that. And so
was there many women? I guess there wasn't many women in the sport back then, was there?
No, there wasn't really, and there isn't now, is there really? I mean, there's more than there were. I think with other disciplines coming through now, like hike and fly, I think that's many ways more attractive to women for whatever reason. No, there wasn't, and there still isn't really. It's something
So is that like a facet of your personality? Do you think, or do you tend to veer to things that others aren't doing and find yourself a bit of a renegade, or is it just simply I'm not interested in many things, but the things I am interested in, I'm completely obsessed with?
Yeah, a bit of both, really. I mean, you're right. I mean, I think I do tend to sort of err towards things which maybe aren't sort of typical, really, for women. I really like my flying. I'm quite into my gaming as well. Interesting. Yeah, because I found out that Andrew Kay is really into his gaming as well. So that was interesting because there's not that many pilots that are, I don't think. But
what's your game? What's your poison?
Well, kind of like in the winter. So when I sort of step out of flying, when I get into the winter, I get back on the console and do quite a lot of like RPG gaming and all that kind of thing as well. So I'm quite into that. I quite like the whole aspect of losing myself in other worlds, because I find that quite sort of relaxing and quite sort of a good distraction from the day to day. So yeah, I enjoy that too. So yeah, quite interesting.
Never had you as a gamer. All the time we spent together. I spent as much time with you as anybody else in UK paragliding on trains to retreats and stuff.
I know it's never really come up. I don't know why. Yeah. So
I guess because I'm not a gamer, right? And me, if I'm into something, I talk about it. I'm like one of those.
No, absolutely, and we have quite a lot in common, don't we? Around all sorts of things like food and stuff like that, and
chocolate biscuits.
Yeah, we're quite foodies, aren't we? So but no, I guess we never really talked about it. But yeah, that is another passion of mine. So yeah,
that's really cool. That is really cool. So in the so you got into it, and then you have been. As you say, I mean, lots of people who are going to listen are not necessarily comp pilots. I do get a fair few comp pilots listen. Do you know what I mean? But you were off then in the comp scene, and it's a weird one for me because like you are as good a pilot as anyone I've flown with, male, female, like it's irrespective. But if we look at you on the female side of things, you're up there with some of the best in the world, and all that's held you back is time constraints, work, and you've had a bit of a gap away from comps, right? That's fair to say.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to mention, really, because I often sits in the back of my mind that I kind of feel maybe I haven't quite reached my sort of true potential in the comp scene. I've done well, and the fact that I've sort of, like this year we turned up in Macedonia and I managed to get myself on the podium. And I haven't done any comps for like 3 years because of COVID and everything. Yeah. So the fact that I was able to do that is kind of like, it's a good thing, you think, oh, that's quite cool. I managed to get on a podium and the female podium, but I haven't actually done any comps for 3 years. But on the sort of downside of that, you think, well, where could I be if I had, really did have the time and the resource to really plow into it, like some of the French who pretty much get sponsored to fly, and I suppose I think I'm getting to an age now where that probably isn't going to happen, really, not to get to that kind of level, because the amount of commitment and, sort of age is against me a little bit, and time is certainly against me, and, So.
And I guess you don't, like, the thing is with when you're younger, it is no real sacrifice. That's what you do. It was like me with my fighting, like that was, I went to the gym 6 hours every day, not in one go, but I spent 6 hours at the gym, 2 hours this, 2 hours that, getting punched in the face every day. Now people say to me about fighting, I'm like, I just really couldn't be bothered. I couldn't be bothered to train that much, and I couldn't be bothered to not go to the cinema and eat popcorn and whatever it might be. I guess it's the same for you. You have Noah and you have Emma, and it's like, what? To be honest, I couldn't be bothered to be away from them for 6 weeks of the year, because realistically, you'd need to be doing 4 or 5 comps minimum to be at the top level.
Yeah, that's right. And obviously now, with family constraints as well, and that would be completely and utterly sort of irresponsible and selfish to just disappear off, which is just not reality anymore, so that's fine. And in that sense, actually, that's why I've really enjoyed the league this year, or just UK flying more specifically, because you can sort of pick your days, and I could take a day off midweek and go out and have a really, really good day's flying. And although that's quite a commitment for that day, with the retrieve and everything else potentially, it's not the same level of commitment as going away for like the Cat 1 comps, like the Worlds, Europeans, and also like the World Cup, like the Super Final and so on. They're big commitments, really big. You're talking more than 2 weeks, really. So yeah, it's a lot. And I've had fun with it. I've done pretty well with it, and I'm kind of fairly at sort of peace with that now, really. I don't think I need to go back to comp flying at that kind of level or intensity, really. I think it's good.
No, I mean, like, I love it, and at the same time, I if I never flew a comp again, it wouldn't hurt me. If I never flew XC again, I'd be devastated. Now, I love comp flying because I'm super competitive. I've been pretty crap at it this year, but I like it. But I haven't got a spare $8,000 a year to spend on comp flying. So, and I haven't got the time to take off work to do it as much as it should be done. So realistically, I can't. But I think we're blessed, especially the last couple of seasons, and especially because we have a nice little group. We're blessed that where we live is possibly the best cross-country flying in the world.
I think it's good. I mean, I think you saying that, a lot of pilots from other countries would be sort of like, you're having a laugh to say that it's that good. But, I've flown a lot of places around the world. I've done a lot of cross-country and comps I've been out to Australia, I've been to Mexico, South Africa. I've been to quite a few different places, obviously quite a lot of places in Europe as well. And, what is good here, I think, is up there. I think it really is. I think it's a great.
And also, like, if you take into account logistics and stuff as well, like, we can go and we can fly for 7 hours, fly a massive triangle, land back at our car, or we can go and we can do a downwind flight for 4 or 5 hours. And no, we're going to be, right, now I've just got to get on a train and get back to my car and I'm going to be home again. Like, logistically, exactly. It's really good. I mean, if you go to Brazil or South Africa and you fly 4 or 5 hours, you could end up in the middle of nowhere waiting 2, 3 hours, 4 hours for a lift.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, especially flying down, not, obviously flying up in the Highlands and stuff is a bit different, but certainly flying down south, you're never far from anywhere, are you, really? Yeah. So it's never difficult to extract yourself out from wherever you land, really.
It certainly isn't. So what was your progression then? When did you from starting to really starting to make headway and thinking like, oh, actually it's cross country for me? Or did you know, or was there like a progression of, oh, I did a little bit and I flew a bit and it got a little bit further? You know, how did it become that you were chasing comps and XC flying?
Yeah, I suppose, you know, that whole classic thing of 50k of bus, isn't it, with the cross country, you know, the whole thing of sort of stitching the climbs together and realizing that, you know, you can put it together and start bashing out some distance, really. But I mean, in the cross country side of things, I didn't fly, you know, it used to be a lot harder to fly 100k. When I first started flying, you know, it was a big deal. If you flew 100k, that's like flying, well, it almost feels like more than flying 200 now. It feels like more like flying 300 or something. You know, it was really hard to fly 100k. And so it was a big deal if you did it, you know. And I remember Tim Pentreath, when he first did his, you know, he's got that video of him absolutely beside himself. He's flown 100k, and it's not that long ago, really. It's what, 10 years ago or so. Yeah. You know, it was a big thing. And so yeah, I didn't fly 100k until 2010, I think it was, something like that. 2009, 2010, I flew 100k for the first time from Liddington, actually. I flew from Liddington and got down to sort of Arundel Way for 100k, and was really pleased with that. And then it just, the next year was massive, because I think it was 2011, because then in 2012 I flew over 200k just like that, off the bat, out of nowhere, you know. And so that was a very surreal flight, you know, for all sorts of reasons. And I never looked back from there since there, really. I think it's the same as any sport, isn't it? Once you've done something like that, you know you can do it again.
Yeah, I mean, like the 4-minute mile, right? So like
Yeah.
the 4-minute mile, and nobody thought it could be done. It was done in the same year that it was done once. It was done 6 times. Like, it's just, you know, it is one of those things once you know. And I guess it's once you relieve yourself of chasing it or the pressure, like once you relieve yourself of, I've hit 100, like, and then you do it again, like, oh right, it's just doing this. And then like people say to me all the time, like, obviously I get involved in a lot of like coaching talks and stuff, and people say to me all the time about flying 100k. I'm like, if you've linked 3 thermals, you've flown 100k. Like, you just now need to link the 4th, and then the 5th. It's doing the same as what you've just done.
It is. Yeah, I mean, I think on the longer flights, the really big flights, then there are some other things that start to come into it in terms of sort of stamina almost, you know, because unless it's a really windy day and you're doing it in sort of 4.5 hours or something, or 5 hours, then, you know, typically it's quite a long day in the saddle, isn't it? You know, and I think I know I do speak to some people and they're like, oh, I couldn't fly for that long, you know, it's too much, you know. And I think you've got to be fairly determined with it as well.
Yeah, especially if you look, that's one of the good things about with our group. Sometimes the radio has saved me. Sometimes I've been like, I can feel myself dwindling and I'm like, I don't really care. And then you get on that radio, someone comes on the radio, even if it's just, you might come up and say, where's that airspace up ahead? We are good to go. Just anything that distracts you, and it's just enough, isn't it, to lift you up. But I think also once you've spent 4 or 5 hours in the saddle, and then, you know, when, like now, generally if we take off, you and I will sort of take off and we'll think we're going to be up for 4, 5, 6 hours. That's generally the way that it goes. So you take off and you go and you fly, and now it just becomes sort of the norm. And then you've just got the competitiveness and the chasing. And but once you're down to on your own, if we lose someone and you've got to fly the last one, those couple of hours, 3 hours of the last of the flight on your own, they can really get hard work, eh?
They can definitely. Yeah. But yeah, so coming back to that first sort of big flight, I mean, like I said, I'd flown 100k once, and I flew well over 200k on that flight.
Was that the Tinto flight? That wasn't the...
No, that was from Milk, actually.
Oh, okay,
yeah, that was from Milk Bowl, actually, and that was on the R11. And I think that's interesting, actually, because I think that sort of step change in the performance of the gliders really helped me, because I am quite impulsive with my flying, as you know. I don't fly particularly slowly. I'm quite impatient. I think it's just the impatience that gets me. No, like that flight we did off the Malverns,
Yeah,
where
that was
you
just
managed to
in my
get
head
back
then.
and I didn't because I broke, and for me that was being super patient, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, I didn't get around that triangle because I eventually I just lost it. I was like, I gotta go.
Yeah, I mean that's a great example of how different we are, not you and I, all of us. In the So that was the first exposure. Although we'd flown together a lot, that was the first real exposure to me of your lack of patience in weak stuff, and because maybe 2 climbs before that is where we were in that dribble by that little barn, and you were like, Wes, I don't think we're going to make the turn point. I really think we should. And in my head I'm like, oh no, we're fucking getting the turn point. And then, so I'm sitting in absolute dribble, and you sat with me, and it broke, and we were good, and we went to that next bit, and I could tell once we were in that, I mean, that was absolute torture for about 45 minutes. And then I could see when you left and you went, I was a bit like, I'm gonna sit in the dribble for a bit longer. And like, I think that's one of my good things, is I can do that. I can just work. If there's something there, I get into the challenge of, oh, I'm gonna stick with this, and you fall out of it slightly. And I'm good at like being competitive with myself and staying in the little bit of dribble. But you're good of, let's bloody go. There's got to be better. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And that day it didn't, you know. But
yeah, I mean, I think it's a case of it sounds a stupid thing to say, but I'm kind of good when it's good, if that makes any sense, you know.
yeah,
So because I know I can fly fast then, and I think coming back to what I was saying, the step change in the gliders made a big difference to me, to suddenly being able to sort of fly more naturally for me, really, because with that extra performance, all of a sudden you've got a much more good chance of being on a long glide and finding another climb, or just having the sink rate to be able to sort of find something. Whereas in the older days, you know, the gliders didn't have that level of performance, and if you were that more impulsive, you'll be down, because you know, you didn't stay with the dribble, and you'd go on a glide, and the glider wasn't very good because the performance of the glider wasn't very good, and you'd be on the ground. Whereas now you've got that extra performance, and it just sort of suits me better, I think, really. So I think that flight I did on the R11, it was a windy day, and it was a very good day. It got better and better and better. I got out to the Cambridge Flats, you know, the classic thing, you get out there and all the sailplanes are out there as markers, and it was a sailplane day, really. And I just happened to be lucky enough that I wasn't having to now launch a glider at that point in the day, because it would have been too windy to do so. So it was a windy day, to be fair. And you know, and I do respect the guys that are better at working in the dribble, you know. It's like Alex and Simon Twist, who's another extremely good pilot in weak stuff. And it is a skill in itself, but it's not. And I've got better at it, but it's not natural for me to fly that slowly, you know. So it's always.
Who were you with on that day? That day that you flew the 200, who were you with?
On that first 200, I did.
Yeah,
I did it on my own.
Wow.
Yeah, I did. Well, that's not fair. I took off with Charles Norwood was out on the site that day, and Steve Newcomb, and both of them, they both went down around about Didcot, or just before Didcot. So they went down at sort of 50k. So I did the next, you know, 160, 70k on my own.
Yeah.
So it was a very surreal flight. I've talked about it before, but it was ridiculously surreal, because, like I said, I'd only ever flown 100k once. And when I got up to about 150k, 160k towards Bedford, you know, that was way above whatever I had flown before. And the day wasn't getting worse, it was getting better, you know, at that point. This was at sort of 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 1:30, 2 in the afternoon. It was getting really good. And I got out to the Cambridge Flats, and it was just booming to sort of 5.5, 6 grand. And it was windy, you know, so I wasn't hanging around, couldn't hang around. And I got to 200k, and I spent the next 30k trying to get down, really. I just got spooked at 200k. I thought, well, once I got to about 220, I could see the coast, and I didn't have an anti-G on an R11, and I was getting sort of 70k an hour ground speed plus, really, at this point. I could see the trees moving, and I just knew I was going to be landing in wind. Yeah. And so I just kind of got spooked to that point and thought, I'm going to get blown out to sea. It's all going to go hideously wrong with me. I'm going to break the British record and be dead. You know, it was that kind of scenario. So I landed. I do look back on that with sort of slight regret, you know, that maybe I should have carried on, but then equally it could have gone wrong with me and something could have happened, you know.
And is when like I always say, like when we're on the ground and you're unhurt and it is a successful flight, right? You've flown your furthest you'd ever flown. You're on the ground. You're uninjured. What's the worst that happens is, oh, I might have gone further. Like I can
exactly, yeah. So that was the impetus then with the cross country, to know that I could do that again, and I've sort of pretty much managed to fly a 200k flight every year since, really, in the UK.
It's getting better and better as well, right? Like I'm lucky that I do these, and I talk to a lot of people who flew way before me, and I hear stories about how it used to be. And I mean, even when I started, I mean, like I think the Ice Peak 6 or Ice Peak 7 was like the top dog. Then the Enzo 1 was like the top. Those were like the top dogs. So even them now, realistically, they're performance-wise, they're not as good as what we've got if you put passive safety and performance together. So even in that short period of time, like it's moved on massively. And someone like yourself who's on a Xeno, like I'm on a comp glider, I don't feel like I need to be on a comp glider in the UK. If I'm flying comps, then yeah, but in the UK, I think a Xeno 2 or something is absolutely as much machine is needed, as you and Hugh have proven this season. But yeah, looking back, like when you guys were on those earlier gliders, I can't imagine what. I mean, it must be like me going back to a B wing now and trying to fly with you guys, you know?
Yeah. Although apparently, you know, I think flying a Xeno 2 now would have more performance than an R11 would have had back then, and with more passive safety as well. So, you know, things have moved on quite a lot, really. But I mean, when I started flying, though, I think, you know, when I hear the talk about the really old days, like when he was flying, you know, comp wings back in the 90s and stuff, and it was, you know, that was proper hardcore. You know, the wings were literally just falling out of the sky, and the design wasn't there, was it, in the way that it is now? Obviously, it's a much younger sport. So we are pretty blessed now to fly these wings that are relatively pretty safe, aren't they, really?
Yeah, and especially with the training that, like you've said, you don't think you've invested enough in, but with the SIV training, the understanding, people like Marlin, people who will go away and look at not just how to fly the glider, but how specific areas of how to be safe in this specific area. I think, yeah, it's just the leaps forward for piloting in the sport, isn't it?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I'd be interesting to see where it all goes now with these sort of the submarine harnesses and stuff as well, because, you know, I think at the moment that people are sort of in, well, obviously the top comp guys are going to go for it, of course they are, but I think, you know, at a more sort of recreational level, it still seems like an awful lot of faff, doesn't it, really?
It's a big investment and a lot. I mean, to be fair, they came to the market a lot cheaper than I thought they would. But it does seem like a lot of faff for a lot of the time. I mean, unless everyone's on one, you're not going to get the full potential out of it, because you're going to be waiting for other people anyway, or you're just going to be a leader of the pack and people are going to follow, which is not really. So for me, I don't really see it's got much of a place in UK cross country until everyone has one, which it's right at the bottom of my list. So
it's interesting. I think someone was saying they just got one, and you know, you're going to need to be on one if you're at the World Cup super final, and so, you know, which you will be, of course, to have the same level of performance. But they're all going to be on them anyway, so there won't be any difference between them anyway, will there?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So now let's get to the gruesome bits. So you've your injuries paragliding. You had accident comp flying, I believe, was it your accident?
Yeah, I've had a couple of accidents comp flying. Yeah. I've had, well, in fact, and if you add up the number of scares I've had as well, I've probably had 3 or 4 sort of scares, 2 of which ended up being accidents. So yeah, I mean, the most recent one was 2015 out in Colombia, and I broke my back out there, which wasn't the best. Classic red mist, last day of the comp. I was doing the World Championships in Colombia, and I took off with a knot in my brake cascade, really, like a high up in the brake cascade. I think it was pulling through on the actual top of the B's as well, and it meant that I couldn't fly with any speed bar, really. I could just about push half bar, but anything more than that, and I get a collapse on that side. Yeah, so bar wasn't really an option. much, or certainly not enough bar to be able to sort of stay competitive in that last task. So I was getting further and further behind, of course, and then there was a frustration because I was placed second amongst the women at that point in the comp last day. And so I just kept going and going and going. And interestingly, no one made goal that day. It wasn't actually a particularly good day. The day was starting to shut down, but you're kind of, the mist is coming down and you're like, I'm getting behind. And what I should have done really is just go and land with the glider in that state, really. Even with half bars, having to sort of really pull on the riser set, really, to just keep the glider flying straight. And then I ended up on a low ridge, and I still don't really know what happened, but basically I piled in. I don't really know. I think the glider must have suffered a collapse, or I must have hit some rotor or something. But I was kind of crabbing in along this ridge to land on it. Actually, I couldn't land in the bottom of the valley because there was a few houses and pools and cables and so on. I wanted to land on this ridge. So I got onto it, and just as I was coming onto it, I kind of just slid onto it and just hit the side of the hill, basically. And I guess that happened because of this knot issue in the wing or something, whether it was affecting the stall on that side or what, I don't know.
It sounds like like the way you've described it doesn't sound like a major sort of incident. It seems like you're coming into land and you've just skidded along the ridge.
Yeah, and literally the last sort of 20 feet that just sort of fell out of the sky, really, the last 20 feet, or slid in. So it's a job to know quite what happened. So that's a bit frustrating, because I don't really, the other instance I've had, I've kind of known what I've done wrong, sort of thing. But that was one where I didn't really know what had occurred, really. So I ended up in hospital with that for a few days. Had to have a minor operation on my back to sort that out. That wasn't the best, really.
How long was recovery from that?
Recovery, kind of full recovery, sort of 6 months or so, really, because obviously it's invasive surgery in my back, and had to go through rehab and stuff with that. I was out of hospital within 5 days after they'd done the op, with another sort of few days in Colombia to recover in a hotel and then fly back. So that's kind of the worst incident I've had. But I had one other one out in Portugal in 2013 on an Enzo 1, second day of the comp in the Brits, and there was dusties going on, and there was so many clues that day that it wasn't a good day, or it was difficult on launch, you know. We had backwind, we had dusties, we had all sorts going on, people taking multiple attempts to launch. I remember several top pilots struggling to get off the hill, and I eventually took off and crabbed along to the right along this ridge and flew through a really snotty bit of air. The glider was a bit all over the place. Came through that, carried on, and then ended up in this sort of small bowl at the end of the ridge. And we've been told to not go round this nose and go any further because it was potentially in rotor, or just not the place to be. So I then came back along the ridge, and whether I hit the same bit of air, probably not, probably a different bit. I probably hit a dusty because of what had been going on launch. Yeah. So I'm almost back at launch. And
how high are you at this point?
Oh, ridge height, really. Okay. But on a steep ridge, and I got absolutely battered by something, and the glider just within a split second was nose down. Literally, it's like I'd done involuntary SIV, without. And of course, SIV, when you do SIV, it's all planned, isn't it? Course, yeah. When these things come out of nowhere, you're not expecting it. As such, I knew I'd just been through some rough air and stuff like that, but you're not expecting the glider to suddenly be looking down at the glider.
Yeah.
So the glider turned 90 degrees, fortunately away from the hill, and had just literally gone nose down. And I then swung back through. Whole glider went into twists, and all I had time to do really was, because I'm literally only 50 foot off the ground or whatever anyway. I had time to literally just bury the brakes to stop any further pendulum or anything, and I then just hit the ground basically on a very steep part of the hill, missed all the rocks, and everyone had seen it on launch. Everyone thought I was dead. It was that violent a situation, and I think a chap called Stephen Hessling. Do you know Stephen?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
He was he was at that comp. Probably put him off for life.
He
And
doesn't fly anymore, right? He's stopped flying.
yeah. And he was the first one on the scene, and I was conscious and everything. I didn't want to move because I wasn't quite sure what was injured. I didn't have any huge amounts sort of back pain or anything. And he was the first one down to me, and I could hear as he was getting closer from the tone of his voice, he thought I was dead, basically, you know. And of course, then I started speaking, and the relief on his face, you know, he wasn't having to deal with a really, really nasty situation. Yeah. So that was another cart off the hill into hospital. And I turned out I hadn't broken anything. I just badly bruised myself, which was miraculous. I thought I'd probably broken my coccyx or something like that, but it was all okay. Thank God.
Quite lucky, I guess, that when you pendulum through, you were clear of the ground. That was the big saviour, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think because I'd managed to, I only had like 1 or 2 twists, so I still had a bit of brake that I could use.
Yeah.
So I was able to bury the brakes. I didn't have time to throw a reserve, no chance. It was just, you know, all I had time to do was to realise that something had happened, essentially, and to sort of take stock for a few split seconds and bury the brakes as much as I could as I hit the ground. And I hit the ground on a very steep part of the hill as well, which would have helped in addition. And yeah, I got away with it. So those are the 2 main.
Do you think a more SIV experience would have helped you in either, or you think I mean, they wouldn't have been of harm. That's not me saying don't do SIV because it will help you in this situation. Always do as much SIV as you can. But do you think now, retrospectively looking back, you think if I'd had more SIV, I might have understood a bit more? Or? Possibly.
I mean, actually, interestingly, that year I had actually done SIV with Russ that year, 2013. So I think that might have helped. I think it probably would have helped in terms of not panicking, probably, you know, because I think a lot of those situations go an awful lot worse when people start doing too much to the glider in those situations, you know. I think of the 2, I know on high performance wings there's always a need for potentially a degree of input if things go wrong, but I think even in those situations overreacting is always worse than underreacting.
Definitely.
You know, because you can just make a really bad situation even worse.
I mean, I say a lot on this podcast. I mean, I just happen to have done 5 SIVs. I'm not like anyone who you should listen to about SIV, but I say it all the time is that SIV shouldn't be viewed as something that's going to keep you safe. It should be viewed as something that gives you an understanding of what's going on. So when my wing turns inside out, it's happened to me a lot in SIV. So I understand. Right, do nothing. Let it fly. Bam, catch that. As where some people will overpilot the deflation or something, and I think that's what SIV does. It just gives you a better understanding of what's going wrong.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, obviously, if you've got an extreme situation like that going on with your wing, then, and especially on a high aspect wing, high performance wing, you're going to probably need to do something with it. But it's having even if it's just a split second to consider what you might need to do with the wing.
Yeah.
That's useful, you know, before you actually do some input if you need to. Whereas if something happens and your first response is just to start pulling strings, you're almost certainly going to make that situation even worse than it was, I think. Yeah. But again, you know, the likes of Russ and Malin and everything obviously got an awful lot more experience with it than we have.
I mean, like when I did this with Russ, and Russ pretty much said the same thing. He's like, yeah, look, you're just like knowing what input is better than just putting an input in, you know, like just knowing what to do is always going to be better, right? Like Jockey as well, when Jockey was on here, like it's just like, you know, like I just think I'm a big advocate of SIV, and when I've done talks and stuff to clubs, and I've seen a couple of people with a bit of pushback, and they're like, well, I've been flying for X amount of years and I've never done one and I'm safe, and I'm like, that's not the reason not to do an SIV. That's
no, quite.
I'm not saying it's going to make you a better pilot. I'm not saying it's going to keep you safe. I'm just saying, you know, it's certainly not going to hinder you to do SIV.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I've taken away from SIV, especially the couple I've done with Russ, is energy is what kills you. You know, it's you want to what you want to do is take energy out of the wing. You know, even if it means the wing's in a state still, keeping the energy out of the wing in terms of auto rotation, in terms of massive pendulum. That's what that should be your goal, really. Even if that means you're keeping the wing slightly back, and you know, it might be a bit, as long as you've got the height, of course, you know, that's the other thing. But if it might be a bit parachute, or it might be slightly stalled, whatever it is, it's better to have it in that state for a second or two than it is to have it massively auto-rotating or whatever, you know. So yeah, it's the energy that's going to kill you.
Yeah,
I think that's something to take away. Yeah.
And then you, like, other instances, I guess it's just like, I saw you for your reserve in St Andre, I guess, just stuff like that, right? Just like minor stuff that didn't result in injury, but just like, was that on your Enzo too, was it?
That was on the Enzo too, and that was a classic example of not doing what I've just said, basically. So that's the one. I think that is the one and only time where a glider's completely got away from me. You know, it completely and very quickly got away from me. You know, obviously high performance wing. I think I was, and I think I've heard Manon talk about this as well. Is if you're tense, you're not going to use the full. You're not going to be, your brake inputs are not going to be as they should be. You know, you're going to be more sort of like timid on the brakes, if you know, when you maybe should need to be a bit more dynamic, whatever it might be. And I think I was up there that year in St Andre. It'd been very, very dry there, and St Andre is always banging. I mean, probably until I started flying sites like in Kruševo and in Rolda, Colombia. Before I'd flown those two locations, I would have said that St Andre was my favourite place to fly. You know, I always absolutely love flying there. I think probably as I'm getting older, I'm probably less like flying there because it's very strong. It's very strong there, you know. But I think again in the early days it kind of suited my style of flying, like we were talking about earlier on, because it is a fairly sort of bish bash bosh there. You know, it's strong climbs, you know, good glides. You can get on with it there. You haven't got to be, again, it's not kind of mincing type flying. It's like, you know, proper.
And you can be well above terrain there. Like from first climb, you can be well above terrain for most of the task.
You can, yeah, exactly. And even if you're not, and if you're on a glide, and you know, if you, especially when I was first doing comps, where you are more likely to get separated from the leaders, you know, and you are more likely to be a bit more at the back, then you had situations where you could catch up a bit because you could just point at a ridge and you might get a 7-meter climb on that ridge almost instantly, you know. So you know, you could actually sort of get out of jail free cards, I used to call it there, you know. So it's an amazing place to fly. And but I think because it had been so dry there that season when we were there for the Brits, and that hill out in front called the Mouchon, we call it the Shark's Fin, it absolutely pumps off there, and it's a beautifully reliable source. You know, if you're on a task and you've been out to somewhere else and you're coming back to there, you know, you can guarantee you're going to get a climb on there. And we were up there before the start gate and it was pretty pokey. I remember that day, you know, you're up at like 2,200 meters or something, and there's still like really rockety stuff coming through when you're up high. And it was just literally before the start gate. It's about like, you know, a minute or two to go. And I think I'd been feeling a little bit nervous up there on the Enzo, and something just clipped me, and glider just went again. You know, I think I didn't quite catch it, and then it just dived really violently and went straight into a very, very tight auto rotation. Yeah. You know, and it's the only time I've ever thrown my reserve, and it was the only time where it was just out. You know, there was no. Yeah. I think I just knew the wing had gone into a state that wasn't way beyond my ability to deal with.
Yeah, like so I was near you on the day, because obviously we're all at Stargate, and I didn't see the collapse. I just saw like a partial rotation and the reserve come out immediately. And then you came on the radio, I believe, when you were under reserve, and that's when I twigged who it was who was who was coming out in the reserve. But yeah, it looked quite violent even once because you know when something's happened, you chuck a reserve, the reserve comes out, everything deadens down. Like your reserve came out and you were still well into a rotation when it came out, and then it exploded, obviously. But yeah, so it did look violent from watching it.
It was, yeah, and I suppose initially the reserve was inflating in what was still pretty punchy air as well and stuff. So yeah, it was a relief for it to come out. And then I had a degree of it downplaning on me as well. I think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough, this whole issue of what to do with your main, especially on a high aspect wing, because you know, sod's law, as soon as you throw your reserve, the wind will decide it wants to fly again, basically. Out it comes. And with a big aspect wing, it can very easily start to want to twist up, you know. I think if it happens again, hopefully it won't, then I think I'd be much more. I think when you first throw a reserve like that, it's like, oh, is it going to come out? You know, and it, of course, so you're actually spending a few split seconds where you're waiting for it to come out, and then it does come out, and what you should have been doing is focusing on the main at that point and getting it in, because I think when the gliders collapse like that, and then you throw the reserve, you've got those few seconds where there won't be any tension on the main, and you can then start hauling it in as quick as possible, you know, I think, because otherwise once it has reinflated, especially if it then starts to go into twist, there's very little you can do with it, really. And so I did come down with a degree of it downplaning on me as well, which wasn't great. But I managed to just about keep it under control when landed. But there's when you're coming down like that, you're like, I want to go in the trees, I want to go in the trees. And I started getting towards these big trees, and they're like these massive old like pine trees with great big spikes on them and stuff. And so I don't want to go in the trees, I don't want to go in the trees. I didn't land in the trees, actually. I landed off to once in this field, so yeah.
But that was the reason for me buying steerable reserves. Like when you fly like comps in places like Romania and places like this, I'm like, the terrain shears away enough that I could glide into the valley away from the trees, because being stuck up a tree on the side of a mountain could be 7-8 hours before you're rescued, and a huge operation, you know.
It is. I mean, yeah, there is advantages to going to the trees in terms of it potentially being a softer landing, I suppose, but there are some disadvantages as well, I think, aren't there?
Yeah, definitely. There was actually like downplaning was the reason I started having a hook knife on my stuff, because I thought if I got into a really big one, I'll just cut one side of my main and then I'll be good. Like obviously, I've not come down into reserve with a main gun mental, and it would depend how high I was. But yeah, that was one of the main reasons I always had a hook knife on my equipment. It was just that's why it's there, really, just for that, you know.
No, I think that's right. Definitely. Yeah.
So this season has been brilliant for us. It's been what would you say was there a highlight for you? Was there a flight? I mean, the last two, actually, I think. So for me, maybe not for yourself, for me, the last 2 seasons flying with Idris, yourself, our little group, you know, like they've been my best paragliding, apart from your first season. That's always your first season. XC is your favorite season, right? But they've been my best season. We've had some really cool flights. Like, what stood out for you? Are you still doing stuff XC wise where you think, like, where you're smiling like this is it, something new, it's something different?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, I think if I wasn't still smiling, then I wouldn't be doing it, you know what I mean? You know, if it wasn't still getting a buzz out of it, or, you know, a reward out of it, then I wouldn't be doing it. So yeah, both these seasons have been good. You know, I mean, if you look at last season, for sure, getting the opportunity a couple of times to fly from Milan was great, you know, and you know, I have to thank Idris for that, because obviously he was based up at his dad's at the Malverns, and you know, he pretty much invited me a couple of times to say, look, you know, stick your car here and I'll drive across the last bit to get across to Milan, you know, which was brilliant for me, because I wouldn't have been able to do that otherwise, really, you know, because it's just too far away, you know, to do that. But how, and you know, again, all sports mental, isn't it? And knowing that I have my car parked in the Malverns, which is what, 90k downwind from Milan, you know, so you get back to the Malverns, you're like, well, I'm back in my car now, you know, I just keep going, you know. But and again, you know, and the retrieve back to the Malverns is good in terms of rail connections and stuff as well. So you know, all that helped. And there were a couple of I've wanted to fly there for a while, and it's not the easiest place to get to, as we know. And I still think that probably more than anywhere else still has, you know, the potential for us to do 300. I mean, the only 300 that's ever been done has been done from there by Richard Carter. So I think it is the place, really, because and I know Sharpenho's good, and Sharpenho's easy for me to get to. You know, it's easy for the likes of you to get to. But that constriction you've got down once you get down to Devon,
exactly,
into Cornwall with the coast, it is tricky. I'm sure it's doable. I mean, Hugh's really up for doing that, and it is a real challenge, and I'm sure it will get done. But I think in terms of the odds of someone doing another 300, it's more likely to come from somewhere like Elan or Merthyr
or Mere, I think, or Elan or Mere. But the only thing with Mere,
or Mere, yeah,
the direction you need from Mere, you either need it quite light, which means you'd have to really be pumping on, like moving on, or you really need like that southwest almost, which isn't a good direction for Mere, because to get round the airspace. So I think those are the two realistically sites that offer the big. That's the big number sites, I think, aren't they? Really, yeah.
I think so. I mean, Sharpenhole is actually quite good in terms of airspace once you get out past the first bit. But I think Elan, again, yes, you've got to go south of Birmingham, but that's kind of the track you're on anyway, roughly, isn't it? You know, it's not that difficult to do that. And obviously the first section, you haven't got any airspace woes. And then once you get out the other side, it's not too bad. You've got the big air bases, obviously. But again, you haven't got the ceiling restriction.
So and only one person in the world likes Sharpenhole, and that's Hugh anyway. Everybody else who's flown Sharpenhole complains about it to me, and then Hugh says how much he loves it.
Well, I've flown it 3 or 4 times, and I've always managed to get away. But it can be tricky, and the fact flying it this summer was tricky. You know, we went there on a day which it wasn't quite as forecast. It was like a couple of days before the 10,000 foot stuff. And in fact, that day they were forecasting 9,000 foot, which didn't really materialize at all. And in fact, the wind strength wasn't as strong as they said it was going to be either. So it was like hot, high pressure with not enough wind, really, which is like a perfectly not good day to fly Sharpenhole. It was horrendous. So yeah, it's tricky, really. But yeah, I mean, last season those flights from Elan were good, and then again, the other big highlight from last year, which we've taken through to this year, was the whole, you know, the use of Worcestershire Beacon really for triangles, and in fact for downwind as well. You know, it's a great site. You can easily do over 200k from there anyway.
It has to be the most reliable site in the country, I would imagine. Which like Idris exposed last year, especially on the day when he went up to Anglesey, is just went out on it looks crap, it looks drizzly, it looked boom, it just went. And it has to be just one of those places. It's right in the middle, the most reliable place, I would assume, really.
I think so. I mean, we had that day this year, didn't we, where the Southern boys, Hugh and Andrew, they went across to the Blorange, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly.
That was the day when I didn't quite get around the triangle with you. We had Lawrence and Joe, wasn't it? We had those guys up on there with us, and
we lost them just after Hereford, right?
We did, but it worked, didn't it? You know, and those two didn't do anything over on the Blorange all day. You know, so
and we were stood on the hill thinking like, this looks crap, nothing's working. Oh, there's the punt, boom, go, we're off, we're away. Which is what I think it gives it, with having a massive tang below it and stuff. There's always, you know, you get to the point where like, right, 1 o'clock is my cut-off, then we're going for it. That is it. Then 1 o'clock comes, like 1:30 is my cut-off, and then 1:30 comes, but someone does punt for it, and then generally, okay, yeah, boom, something works, and you're up and away. And like when we've flown it with the wind, we've launched and we've jumped over into the lee to get the climb off of there. It's just always something sort of works in there. So I think it's probably one of the most reliable places, and especially in light wind.
I think so. I think the only direction where it's not great is in the southwesterly, isn't it? Because obviously it's going to take you straight up towards Birmingham airspace. A downwind day in the southwesterly, obviously not going to work. But anything else? I mean, I think apart from the flight I did from Selsley this year, I did just short of 200 from Selsley this year. All the other, both downwind and triangle flights I've done have all been from Worcestershire Beacon this year. It's just such a reliable site. And I mean, again, I've got experience from flying there a long time ago, when we didn't have access to Worcestershire Beacon, so we were just confined to flying Kettle Sings. And back in those days, it was kind of like, oh, it's easterly, we could go to Kettle Sings. You know, that was kind of all you did with it. You know, if any other direction, you wouldn't even think about it there, really. And it was only really with the beacon being opened up that the sort of potential for triangles and so on started to come through there. And I think it just sticks up that little bit higher. I don't know what it is, but it does make a difference. You know, it really does. Yeah.
People always, like, people say to me all the time, like, oh, you're going to Malverns, where are you going? I'm like, well, there's only one place to go. Why would I go to Kettle Sings? I don't know why. Like, and then you still go there and you launch off Worcester Beacon. You look at Kettle Sings and there's 40 pilots, and you're like, which is good. That's where you should go. Actually, no, you should definitely keep
Yeah, go down there. Go down there.
Yeah,
like Guy did this year, of course. I mean, that's a great story. The fact that Guy went to Kettle Sings by mistake, essentially. He assumed, because I'd had a conversation with him in the morning, and he hadn't asked exactly where it was we were going, and then he'd gone up Kettle Sings by mistake, and turns out he managed to get back down from there, come up to the beacon, take off, catch us up, and then to get the 100k triangle record as a result, speed record.
Yeah. Crazy. And that was on the day after I'd done my big triangle, and I didn't go out because I was thinking, well, I don't know if many people are even going to bother, and because you and I had spoke on the phone, and I said to you, I'm probably going to have to go to work, and I missed it. I didn't go out. You lot went on. So I could have back-to-back 300s, but yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, it could have been. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, because Andrew went home as well rather than staying up. And if, you guys had stayed up, you definitely would have done 300 back to back, I think. Yeah. It was that good. I mean, there were so many days like that this year, really, wasn't there? You know, it's incredible.
Yeah, there was. I mean, I think like a lot of it as well is we have a group now, a good group, especially with Andrew and Hugh, like Hugh's playing, and hopefully Hugh plays next year as well. Like, and then Martin joined in this year as well, and we have Laurie Nocter comes down from up north sometimes. We have groups who are just like, fuck it, we're here to fly big, like, you know, like I'll go out and someone will say like, what are you thinking? And I'm like, I'm thinking 200. They're like, do you think it's on? I'm like, no, but why? What else would I try? Like, what? We're going big, aren't we? Let's go, you know. And I think that's the best thing. I think we're doing big things because our mentality has changed a little bit, and we're all sort of saying, let's just go for it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Hugh's very much of the same sort of mentality as well. I mean, the day we did the triangle, the 7 of us, the day after you guys, from Worcestershire, I remember getting up there, and I was saying, oh, how big are we going to go with this? And he said, well, definitely over 100, you know. So yeah. I think that's one for next year, isn't it? See if we can get the record for the triangle.
Yeah, I think so.
You know,
I think because like for me, I love the league. I'm a massive advocate of the league, and obviously I get on really well with them, and I liaise with them a lot. And I think that but I never think about winning the league. And because I was obviously at the top of the league for about 6, 7, 8 weeks, whatever it was, people kept asking me about winning the league. I'm like, no, at some point I'm going to go to work. At some point, something's going to happen. I've got confidence in. But for me, every flight I do, once I have 6 flights in the league, I try and make sure none of my flights are smaller than, or will award me more than my lowest flight in the league. Mm-hmm. So then I start thinking, right, no flight should be less or smaller than my biggest flight in the league, because you want your biggest one to be your smallest one by then. And it's not to do with winning the league, it's just to do with beating my 6 figures. And I think lots of people go out, like this is younger people who are just getting into XC, maybe are going out to put 6 flights in. And I think now that we're at a point where we look at it and we're like, we have to go, sometimes we do ridiculous stuff, but do the ridiculous stuff and try for massive stuff that pushes your biggest flight right back, and your numbers start to come up. If they don't, you've had an amazing time, you've chased something. But for me, the league's I'm never thinking about winning the league. I don't know about yourself, like I'm not, because I'm just too competitive. It would eat away at my soul. I'll end up bankrupt, living off the street, sleeping under my glider.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I'd like to win it. Of course I would. But I mean, I think it's keeping it in perspective, isn't it? Basically, you know, I mean, I think I'm not doing it just for the cross country league. You know, I'm doing it because I enjoy flying. I'm doing it because I like the challenge. I think one thing that does come out of the league is like, once you've got 6 flights in there and they're all reasonably sized in terms of points, you know, you're going to have to do something big to sort of even sort of get another flight on there. And that's a good challenge. You know, I think if that challenges you then to try and go and break the overall triangle record, for example, you know, that's great. You know, we could argue about the multipliers, about whether the multipliers are too big or too small. But I think, as Hugh said, you know, we'd be going out doing those flights anyway, whether it was, you know, the multiplier was half that. You know, you still go out and try and do a big triangle or do a big downwind flight. You know, so and there's been quite a lot of debate recently about, you know, you've got some people saying, oh, triangles are worthless, and other people saying, oh, downwind's worthless. You know, it's like, no, it's all valuable. You know,
of course,
you know, I mean, there's been talk about, oh, well, you know, if you go and do it in a really strong wind, then it's, you know, it's not a flight, you know. It's like, well, yes, I get the idea that actually if it's forcing you to take off in dangerous conditions because it's really, really windy. And I think a case in point was the last big flight that we did off the Malverns, you know, that downwind, that was a windy day. I mean, that was, there's no doubt that was marginal on takeoff. So, you know, some people didn't take off that day and were perfectly good pilots who could have flown a big distance that day. But so, yeah, I get that. I do get that. But I think I certainly don't have an attitude of, oh, I only want to fly downwind, or I only want to fly triangles. You know, I think I enjoy them both. I enjoy them both. Yeah. I get that flying downwind is great because you're covering terrain. It's interesting in terms of what you're seeing because you're going to different places. I get that. I like that whole kind of thing of almost like running along on a wave. You know, it feels like you've got the wave behind you, and well, especially when it gets good, you know, and you get out into Cambridge Flats and so on, and there's big booming stuff going on, and you know, it's quite tactical. And as Hugh has also said, you know, it's quite tactical in terms of the airspace navigation and so on. But equally, it's a real buzz, isn't it, to get around a triangle and get back to your car? You know, it's great.
I mean, I look at it like, so flying downwind is an adventure. That's an adventure to me. And if I put a turn point, I'm aiming for that turn point. But it's an adventure when I fly downwind. When I fly a triangle, it's a challenge. And these are the two the ways I look at them different. Now, there was a couple of times last year where I was gagging for a downwind flight. I was like, I don't want to do another triangle. I want to go downwind. I want to go downwind. But then you go on a massive downwind flight. And, like, you know, we've spent hours and hours on trains together, stopped in London, ate dinner in London, then got on the tube. And it's 10 o'clock, we're saying goodbye to each other. We've both got another hour and a half yet, you know. Like, and you get to the point where you think, oh, I wouldn't mind a triangle tomorrow, you know, like you get them. But I think they're both equally as valuable, and all of it. I think it all gets taken a bit too seriously. Like, listen, we're idiots flying rags around the sky. Like, I get it, someone's going to win the league, but we have so much fun on the radio, on the drive there, eating food in Paddington or whatever it might be. We have a great laugh. We have awesome fun, and it's not one thing's better than the other, and it's not you're more skillful pilot for doing this or that. It's just that's what the day is. We fly the day.
It is, and I actually do like that whole adventure. Actually, when you land out somewhere and you're like, right, how am I going to get back this time? You know, but something always happens. You know, invariably it doesn't take as long. Well, it can take a long time because you've got a long distance to go. But it's amazing how often someone will be there where you landed, or you know, someone will give you a good lift to the station or whatever it might be. Stuff always happens, really. So, and that's another good adventure as well in itself. You know, the whole après flying, I really enjoy that side of it as well. You know.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's good.
So even after all your injuries, after everything, you can't imagine life without flying?
No, not really. I mean, I know there's been a few quite nasty accidents this year, which do sort of make you think, oh God, you know, I don't, you know, I'm 52 now. I don't really want to have a big accident, which, you know, is going to incapacitate me or make my older life more difficult necessarily. I get that, but I think coming back to what we almost said at the beginning now, I think my days of doing big comp stuff is probably done, really. Touch wood, all the instances I've had have been in comps, really, where I've been pushed myself a bit too hard or compromised my safety because for, you know, trying to win a task, which sounds ridiculous, but that's ultimately what happens. You get in that mindset, you know.
Are you competitive away from comp flying, Kirsty?
I think I am reasonably competitive. Yeah, I wouldn't say I was uber competitive, but yeah, I am reasonably competitive with stuff I do. I quite like challenging myself with things. So I suppose from that sense, you kind of quite like competition, therefore. Yeah, so I think those sort of days are over. So I mean, you can have an accident in any kind of situation with flying. Of course you can. It's always there, isn't it, in our heads, really?
Yeah.
But
I mean, like I always, when I was base jumping, I always used to say it to people, like, if I get injured base jumping, paragliding, skydiving, I'll be devastated. I'll be absolutely. Don't ever think, oh, we did something he loved. No, I'll be absolutely gutted if I'm spiraling down under a paraglider to my demise all the time. I'm going to be thinking, what a dickhead, what an idiot, 100%. But I'll be more upset if I live my life not doing those things. So although it's not doing, he's gone doing something you love. I just, like you've got to do the things in your life that you love, because we don't know how long this is for any of us, right? So I just think you have to do them, and you have to be as cautious and as think about things as much as you can. But you got to do the things you love, haven't you?
I think so. Yeah, definitely. I mean, for sure, there's more risk paragliding there is than there is hitting a ball around a tennis court. But yeah, you got to do the things you like. I mean, I don't paraglide because it's inherently dangerous. I think cross-country flying is very different to doing acro, for example, isn't it? I think a lot of people who get into acro, who enjoy acro, they really like the buzz, don't they?
Yeah,
I mean, you got it. If you're doing infinite tumbles, you've got to like the buzz, because that's a pretty extreme, relatively extreme thing to be doing, Whereas cross-country flying, and most of the time, is positively serene compared to sort of acro and stuff. So I'm not doing it for that kind of a buzz, really. I'm doing it because I like the challenge. I like being outdoors. I like, I don't know. I mean, there is a buzz though, isn't there? Contrary to what I just said, the buzz of actually getting like a low save or getting a good climb is phenomenal.
I'm fed up of every flight until I get below 1,000 feet, and then I don't want to be on the ground. Every flight I can at some point say, I was like, well, I've had enough of this now. And then you get low, and then you're like, oh, no, I'll do anything. Give me just a 0.1. I'll do anything.
Yeah. No, it is a drug. It is a drug for sure. I don't know. Yeah, it has to be a drug, because really you're going out and doing the same thing you've done lots of times. So the fact you want to keep on doing it is definitely a drug.
Yeah, it certainly is. So I'm going to let you go shortly, because I know you've got work to back to. Any advice to younger pilots, and I guess specifically some female pilots? Not that just because you're a woman, you shouldn't necessarily be put in a position where you should speak to female pilots, but it might sound better coming from a female pilot. Any advice to them? And is there a possibility that they could maybe reach out to you if they wanted to say, like, look, I want to go further, I'm just a bit cautious about this or nervous about this?
Yeah, I'm always here. If people want to talk to me about how I might be able to do better in cross country or in comps or whatever, absolutely. My door's always open to chat about things, for sure. I think specifically in terms of women getting into it, I think I would say in the main, don't be sort of put off by the fact that it's a male-dominated sport. Don't be. And when I say that, I mean more not in terms of the actual flying. I mean more in terms of the social side of it. In terms of mixing with lots of other guys, because you're all a good bunch generally. I think generally speaking, people who are into paragliding are the kind of people you'd want to hang out with. I think generally, I think they typically are reasonably, open-minded types of individuals, and I think it's not a difficult environment to hang out in, really. I would say, generally speaking, I don't think it is anyway. Sure, there's the odds. You get at the high-level comps at the PWC, it can be a little bit more sort of blokey and misogynistic, I suppose. But
that's cultural. That's cultural as well.
I think that is cultural. I definitely think it is. Yeah, absolutely. But certainly a sort of hanging out with the Brits at the Brits. It's a good vibe. It really is. It's a good environment to be in. I've certainly never had any problems from that sort of respect. I think in terms of progression for women coming into it, then again, I think you've just got to. But see, you say these things and you think, well, that applies to guys as well,
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Anyone coming into it, you've got to take it at your own pace, and take. I think the other good thing with the sport as well is it is a sport where you can take it in all these different directions now. You've got hike and fly, you've got the acro side of it as well. But even within the cross country, or if you enjoy going out and going for an evening soar or whatever it might be, that's great. I mean, again, how many people get to do that? And I think you have to, I think we have to put that into perspective sometimes as well, don't we, with the stuff that we're doing, because, you know, without wanting to sound whatever, we are sort of operating at the top end of the sport in terms of cross country and stuff like that. That's, in terms of the UK population, the number of people doing that is infinitesimally small, isn't it? You know, there's no one really is doing that, you know. So you know, and I think that, I'm going off at tangents now, but that feeds back into, you know, if you land out like one of us lands out, you should not be beating yourself up, because you've already spent the day doing something that most people in the UK will never do, you know. Most people on the planet have never done in the history of humans being on the planet, and probably, to end it on a slightly bad note, we probably won't be doing in the future either, if the likes of Amazon get their way with drones and God knows what else going on, or more airport grabbing extra airspace and so on as well, you know. So I think it's definitely a case of we need to get on with it while we can, really, in that respect.
Yeah, well, I think, having spent a lot of time with you, like, I think you'll be a great asset to any women who maybe don't want to maybe reach out to someone like me, or say, like, you know, you'd be a great asset for them to reach out to and say, look, Kirsty, I really am into flying some XC. I would like to be a bit more involved. I was a bit worried about it. Even if you literally just said, look, I really think speak to Wes or speak to Alex or they'll be really good to help you doing it. But I think, for coming from a female perspective, that's better than me, the idiot with the beard and the funny ears, telling a young girl and assuming I know what her worries might be. So the fact that you've said that is brilliant. And, you know, like, it can only help, right, if people know, actually, there's this person who is, I mean, you are as top of the game as it can be in this country and throughout the world for female paragliding. So to have you is an absolute asset. And I don't joke around when I literally say the last 2 years flying where we've had our little group has been my favorite. And I can't, like, next year is all about rekindling our little group again. I mean, we talk all through the winter anyway, like the size matters doesn't die off in the winter, but we, like, next spring, I really can't wait to rekindle it all, get our UDNs back out and start. Although you're not on one anymore, I don't think, are you?
Well, I've still got one. I've been I've had the slight luxury of mucking around with 2 or 3 different ones, deciding what I think's best. I think I might get back on the UDN, actually. We'll see, but yeah, no, it's been good. And you know, I think next year as well, yeah, it's a little group, but I think, you know, there's other pilots up and coming as well. You know, they're more than welcome to muck in with us as well, aren't they?
Definitely, yeah. It's best when we're as a group. It's absolutely brilliant. But Kirsty, listen, you've got to get back, so that's fine. Thank you very much for coming on. We've wanted to do it for a while. I'm so glad I had you on. Thank you.
No, it's been good to finally get it done. Yeah, absolutely. Really enjoyed it, Wes. Thanks ever so much.
No worries. You stay there. I'll say goodbye to you in person.